Love Your Kitchen, Designing the Heart of the Home, proudly sponsored by Blum, the podcast where we explore the art of crafting your dream kitchen. I'm your host, Faye Newman, a freelance kitchen designer with a passion for creating spaces that truly reflect the heart of the home. In today's episode, I thought it would be really interesting and insightful to talk about the fundamentals to space planning. So space planning, for those that don't know, is essentially how you organise and arrange an interior space so that it optimises its functionality, its general efficiency, and also the overall aesthetics of the space. So this would be analysing the amount of space around your cabinetry, for instance, looking at which layout works best from a usability point of view for everybody using their kitchen, what type of appliances they're positioning, any other sort of storage equipment that you might be incorporating, and also just the general flow of the space. So obviously the fundamentals, or the reason why it's so important and crucial in a kitchen, is because it's such a high functioning space. And unfortunately these days we need it to be a bit of everything. So it's where you host, it's where you cook, it's where you make the breakfast, it's where you do the homework, it's where you do absolutely everything, especially in an open planned environment. So space planning, it's crucial to consider, which is why I wanted to speak to you about a few elements today. Obviously, your designer can help you with this as well as you go through the process. But I think if you go into showrooms or when you approach a designer, knowing a little bit about this prior to going in, it just helps the process because you will know your wants and needs from that space. And then obviously the designer then can, or the professional, the expert that you're working with, they can help guide you through that process. So the first element to consider would be to evaluate the traffic flow. And by this, it's essentially just looking at how many people do you have in the house, how many people use that space all at once, times of day you'll have in the breakfast, the school run, you'll have everybody racing around, grabbing a piece of toast or whatever as you're running out the door, but that'll be a very intense environment at the start of the day, likewise for dinner time as well. So it's just looking at making sure that you've got clear walkways everywhere around whichever kitchen layout works best for your project, making sure that at least on your main walkway, that you're not going for, say, like the minimum. So, I would normally suggest, or a lot of designers suggest, sort of 900mm as the minimum walkway. I have this conversation with clients all the time. It's a case of, if you're used to a small distance and you're okay with that, that's fine. It's not for me to say that needs to be bigger. If it works, don't change it. But equally, I would always at least recommend, if you can, 1100mm, a metre walkway for your main walkway. If it's a case of you've got obviously an island, for instance, and in a less used part of that island, maybe just where the seats are and things, maybe you could look at going for, or if it's slightly smaller than that, then that should be okay for your main walkway. So say if you've got a route into the utility, for instance, or into the garden or into the dining room or the living room, I would consider that a high traffic flow area because you're moving from one room to the next. So regardless of whether you need to use the main room, which is the kitchen, you might have somebody else that wants to use one of those other rooms. So therefore they have to walk through that space to obviously get to that other room, which sounds very obvious. But actually when you do start speaking about it, it does make sense. So for instance, if this isn't managed well, an example of this could be that if you've got your, seating round an island, for instance, you've put that in that corridor almost from your kitchen to utility. So you've put, so where people are sitting, say if you've only got a metre, 1100mm, something like that. If you think about it, you've got somebody sat on that stool. They don't normally sit straight under. They normally, sit slightly out on an angle, etc. So you've got an extra bit of obstruction. Obviously, this isn't nice to think about your guests as obstruction, but it's true from a practical perspective. They are obstructing that space to walk from that one room to the other. So naturally, I would look at if you have only got, say, like a metre or 1100mm, to move that to the opposite side of the room, or maybe behind the island, so that you haven't got that obstruction. So that is a sort of a clear example of things to consider from that perspective. But usually, if you can get sort of, as I say, 1100 mil around an island or as a main walkway, you should be okay. So just some things to consider. So the next huge factor to look at regarding space planning is your work zones. So we all harp on about this so much, but it's so important. So there used to obviously be a working triangle, which I suppose still does come into play. However, it's got a lot more sides on it now than just a triangle, because you are looking for obviously your main cooking area, your food preparation area, your main dry goods storage, for instance, your washing up area. Obviously, you've got your fridge freezer, so you've got all of your cool storage in there. So there's lots and lots and lots of zones that need to be considered. So for a prep area, for instance, things to consider would be obviously to make sure you've got sufficient room either side of your hob, especially on an island, in order to obviously prep and use as you will. So when I say especially on an island, I mean sort of in the conventional layout where you've got the hob against the wall. Even if you only have a tiny little bit either side of your hob, usually it's going into sort of like a corner. So say if it's like an L-shaped layout, so you have that bit of the corner to chop into. So say if you've got a few extra bowls and you're chopping different vegetables into each bowl, then obviously you've got more stuff to try and consider. Whereas if you're looking at doing that and you've positioned your hob at the end of an island, which a lot of us do. I mean, I've just recently done a design with an L-shaped island where this is the case. And it's quite a difficult room because it's a beautiful cottage, but there's so many, like when they're knocking through their extension, they've got to keep quite a large pillar in the space, and then they've got nibs everywhere because of it's just an old building, so it's you naturally have your quirks. And then actually when you go to fit the kitchen, none of the walls will be square, and that will be exciting from an installation point of view as well. So back to the point at hand. In that particular space, we've got the oven towers behind us, so the main sort of cooking area behind us, and then directly in front of that we've got the hob. But because of the distances, because we're having cabinets on all four of the walls, because of the shape of the room, we've got to consider about walkways obviously going around that entire island. So you've got, say, 600 mil or 700 mil deep worktops either side, and we've actually got an Arga the one side actually, so Argas will obviously naturally be deeper than that. We've got to be mindful about how wide we make that island, and naturally like which hob you go for, because even if you were looking at a 700 mil induction hob, for instance, and then you got upgraded to an 800, that's great. However, have you got that extra 50 mil give either side if you are already tight on prep space? So again, that's something to consider and work through with your designer as well. So in this instance, we've kept it at, I believe it's 350, 400 either side, which is still quite small. So I think we've just got a little bit of work maybe where we look at reducing, obviously we can't reduce the Arga, but look at reducing the cabinetry on the one side of the room so that we can extend that island a little bit wider in order to make that a little bit more efficient, because they're keen cooks as well. So it's important that you've got a sufficient prep area. And if you don't have it directly by the hob, even if you can turn to the side and then you've got it there, as long as you've got it directly by your cooking space, you don't want to be walking from one end of the room to the other where prep's in one space and then your cooking is in another. So it's hard to sort of differentiate how I can help you for your space, but equally, if you think of it as a zone that you want cooking and prep, especially in the same zone, and then obviously I'll go through the other ones now, then that's the best way to look at it for your particular space. So the next areas would be like your messy areas. So this would be like your washing up, your bins, etc. So I naturally always put, if clients want an integrated bin, I always put them by the sink, purely just so you can scrape into the bin, rinse, and then put directly in your dishwasher. Some clients do say if they want a second dishwasher, maybe in the utility, or if they do a lot of hosting and they want one on the island for their glassware, for instance. Obviously, you can break the rules and make it, or these aren't set rules, sorry, so you can make it however's best for your space. But in principle, I would keep all those the same. Keep your sink in front of a window if you can. So when you're washing up, it's really nice to look outside, dependent on where you are. And then, keep all that in one area. Large pantry cabinets, so larders, for instance. At home, my parents have the old school pantry where they actually do have a dedicated corner almost with an inbuilt pantry, which is amazing because they can just put everything there. If they're bulk buying, they can pop everything in there, cereals all in there, etc. So all of your what we call dry goods storage, which would be like your pasta tins, as I said, cereal, extra spices, sauces, etc. Everything can just be shoved in there in one place, and then you can obviously move them to your other allocated areas. Also, breakfast areas are, of course, really popular at the moment. So if you've got a dedicated breakfast area where you can go and you've got, your cereal already lined up, where you can make like a little coffee station, for instance, put bowls and things in your drawers underneath. Then you've got, if the children need to make breakfast, then they've got an allocated space to make their breakfast, so that it's not in if you're trying to wash up or if you're trying to prep for later or whatever, it's not in your direct space. So it's just really think about what are your busy parts of the day, what are the areas that you need a lot of space for, and just make sure that you're considering that in the design. So of course, another huge consideration would be how to maximise your storage. So obviously we've spoken about this lots of times in regards to the different mechanisms that you can have, etc. But it's more about, as I mentioned, just maximising each individual cabinet so that everything is planned out efficiently. So you might not need lots of cabinets absolutely everywhere where it doesn't actually have a job. For instance, you might have loads of wall cabinets and then you've got tins going across all of those, or you've got, it's just not organised space. So really home in when you do get, say, like your initial furniture layout or your initial kitchen layout, really home in and have a look, what are you wanting to store where? And then that will provide sort of the sufficient layout needed for your space. So there's different storage options available. So obviously you've got your larder storage. So this could be individual drawers. Sometimes clients prefer sort of internal drawers where you can pull them out individually. Sometimes clients prefer that over the large pull-out because the pull-out can be quite heavy. Other clients like to just be able to pull it all out in one go and then you can see it both sides. So it completely depends on what you're after. You can also get what's called like a tandem larder storage, which is on a hinge. And then you have part of the storage on the side attached to the door. And then the other section pulls out forward as you open it. So again, that's more efficient than, say, if you were to have shelves, because it's pulling out all of those necessary items that get shoved at the back, or they just slowly get further and further to the back of your cabinet. You can pull those forward nice and easily with that, and then again, that's made that cabinet more effective than if you were to think about shelves, for instance. Obviously, your main ones will be your corner storage as well. So you have what's called the Le Mans corner storage, which actually apparently is named after the famous Le Mans endurance race in France, which apparently is famous, but I didn't know anything about it. I remember once I said to a client, I told the story and I thought it was based on an F1 track, and I got corrected because apparently the endurance race is different to an F1 track. So that was fun. So these are great. You can either have a Le Mans or a Magic Corner, for instance, which gets into the back of those corner cabinets. If you get a good make, they can hold a lot of weight. So for instance, I know clients sometimes put their slow cookers on there, their big woks, and stack them quite high. My parents have had their kitchen now for 5-6 years maybe. It was when I was first in the industry, and I've been in the industry now 7 years, probably, 5 or 6 years. They've had their Le Mans and it's working perfectly. They are the client that have their heavy items on there, just so they're not having to obviously lift anything at an angle out of a cupboard or like pull it out and then lift it. They just literally pull out the Le Mans. They're usually on separate shelves as well, which is quite helpful. So again, you're not having to go underneath to reach it and then back up. And then they literally just have to lift it straight off the Le Mans onto the side. You can go for one step better than that and have it where, say, if you've got space to have a dresser coming down to the worktop, or maybe like a tambour cabinet, which is where you have the pull down metal section, which is on like a rail system coming down. If you put an electrical point at the back or an electrical socket at the back of those cabinets, you can put your big mixers. So even if you've got, say, like your air fryers, you can plug them straight at the back, pull them out, use them, and then push them back in. So it, again, depends on your layout. So it's just about optimising that storage as much as possible. Something else to consider as well would be where you put your cleaning products, for instance. So I know this gets a little bit overlooked sometimes, but usually, I mean, if you don't have a set utility space, all of your cleaning products, obviously, for the house need to be in the kitchen. So, I mean, I say that from experience because we're in an apartment at the moment, and then we've got an integrated washer dryer in the kitchen space. And then, so the main hub of all of our cleaning products, spare kitchen rolls, etc., are in that sink cabinet. And actually, even though we love using our waste disposal, it eliminates having a shelf in there because obviously you've got to account for the waste disposal to fit underneath your sink. So when you are looking to go for a hot tap where you need a tank in that cabinet, or if you are looking to go for a waste disposal, consider that when you're thinking about your planning as well. It might be a case of, I mean, it's a little bit harder with waste disposal because naturally they are in the middle, obviously where your plug is, so they're in the middle of that cabinet. So maybe you could look at some storage elements that you can fit afterwards. You can retrofit this afterwards, so use the space and see what you actually need first, where if you've got, say, a big sink cabinet, you can sometimes get sort of like a little 300mm pull-out that fits on the bottom and then runs on a rail system where you just pull that out and then you can stack everything more efficiently on there. Because if you think about it, you've got your sink bowl underneath. You should have two sides, either side of that, where you can become like efficient storage. If you're not going for a waste disposal and you're going for a hot tap, the tank's sizes depend on obviously which one you want to go for. Quicker, for instance, would be the hot tap that I would always recommend. The water tastes better because it actually reaches and boils to 100 degrees and you can taste a difference. I mean, I'm a green tea drinker, so you can taste a difference from that regard. But say if you're just going for the normal Pro 3 tank underneath, they're still quite big. So things to consider would be if it's quite a small cabinet that you're going for, or if it's a Belfast sink cabinet, for instance, obviously the sink height eats into that bottom sink cabinet space. So what you could do is cut a hole in the bottom of your cabinet in the corner and then actually sit that tank using the plinth space underneath, which is usually voided off, which is where obviously your cabinet legs are, etc. So again, that would just be using that a little bit more efficiently. If it's a case of you've got quite a big sink cabinet, you could literally move them around wherever, so you could put them directly sort of in the back of your cabinet. You could even look to see if your supplier could provide a shelf, like an internal cabinet shelf. They're really inexpensive, especially if you're using Egger board, which is industry standard in the UK especially. Look at maybe get your fitter to construct a vertical and then a couple of horizontal shelves on, say, the left-hand side with the tank on the right. So it's just something like that, is utilising that space a little bit more or incorporating that pull-out. So it's just making it more convenient, making it more usable, making it more thought through. And it just might be one of those things that obviously it won't change your life, but equally, if it makes you save time and if you're happier seeing it all organised really nicely and working more efficiently, it's worth it from that regard as well. So something else to consider, obviously we've spoken about the traffic flow and evaluating that. We've spoken about what zones to consider, like your work zones, and how to maximise your storage. Now it would be to look at how to optimize the layout for the space. Naturally, this can be, unless you're working from like a blank canvas, it might be a case of that you want to stay with your existing layouts for here. So if you've got an L-shaped kitchen, you could stick to having a L-shaped. Maybe you could incorporate a peninsula coming off the one wall if you've got room, if you want to incorporate seating and you haven't got to then think about the walkway on, if you've got an island, for instance, you haven't got to think about the walkway going around your island. Something I would think about is, and I know I've spoken to Sam, or me and Sam have both spoken about this on one of our Q&As, is don't put an island in for islands like just because you want an island. You need to make sure that, you know, one, it's not overwhelming the space, unless the only reason why you need a massive island is if you're having both your cooking and your wash area on the same space, and then you've just got the wall behind for all of your larder cabinetry. So then that island needs to be your cooking space, your prep space, your washing space, you know, storage. I know will mainly be at the back, but from a usability perspective, like drawers, etc., you need to make sure that's functioning about, you know, 4 massive functions, that island. So naturally that would have to be big. But if you're in, you know, a conventional size space, say that you've knocked a wall through, whatever, and you haven't actually added to the width of the space, you've got to be careful of just trying not to put sort of like a skinny island in. If it works for you and, you know, that's your absolute dream, then fair enough. But I'd just be mindful that you're better off probably going for a peninsula where it comes off one of the sides, so that you can have a larger storage space, larger seating space, and you don't have to think about 2 1-meter walkways, as we've spoken about before. So you're actually optimizing your storage subconsciously, not having to take that away from the island that you've just put in, and you're gaining it, obviously, if you've got your peninsula coming out. So it's just thinking about how to maximize it. Obviously, we've spoken about height before as well. So, you know, use that height if you feel like that's going to work for you. Again, if you don't, then there's no point using it. It might be a case of you want to scribe to ceiling just to make it easier from a cleaning perspective. I've had clients before that have said that they've put newspaper or sugar paper on the top of their cabinets, and then they literally just take that down, put that in the recycling, and then put some more up when they don't want to clean on top of the cabinets. But obviously it's up to you what you want to do. If you scribe, it's better. If your ceiling's really out of alignment though, and you are going for a dark colour, you can sometimes see that it's a bit wonky. So again, that's something to think about. But those are obviously the finer details. And also the main one for this would be where you position your appliances as well. So as I mentioned before with the seats, etc., in the main workflow space, from, say, if you're going from one room to the next, this is the same for appliances. So think about if you're having, that's the main wall in between those doors, or that you need to have your larder appliances where you've got, say, a single oven, a combination oven, microwave and grill, and your warming drawer, etc. Just be mindful that if you've got obviously hot trays, etc., coming out of there, you need somewhere to put that tray down straight away. If it's really warm and you've tried to do it with a tea towel because you've been lazy, which sometimes I do, so you want to move that onto a surface straight away, just be mindful that you have got that space behind you. If you, say, had seats there, you wouldn't have that space because you would have to go over the seats, or if you were hosting and you've got friends over, you would have to walk around the seating section and then put that down. So it's just forward thinking, see where the high congestion zones are, as we mentioned previously, and then I would put your appliances in the complete opposite area, just so that when you're cooking, nobody else is in your zone. So something that I now change within my designs, like when I think naturally when you are, or a few years ago when you just, you know, you're new to designing, you tend to put a large drawer pack underneath your hob. That's where your cutlery is, your pan drawers, you know, plates, etc., all in one go. But actually, if you're thinking about it, if somebody's at the hob and they want to get a teaspoon because they're making a cup of tea, you're actually better off having your cutlery drawer in a different area, maybe where you're actually dishing out. That would be the best place to have your knives, forks, or teaspoons, for instance, say by your hot tap or wherever, just to make that function more. So say if you've got one of you that's cooking and then the other person who is the disher outer or gets the table or lays the table, or if the children are getting involved, you've just got those in separate areas then. So again, you're not feeling too congested. If it's a case of in your particular kitchen that doesn't work, then obviously we've got to work with your space as we can. But equally, you could have a small integrated internal drawer fitted onto the top of a base cabinet to still navigate that issue. Completely depends, but there's so many choices out there now. And I think what I normally say to clients is go all in and design everything how you want it, with your wish list, and then piece it back from there, because at least then you know your worst case scenario and then you can work back from there. Leading on from layouts, something else to consider is to balance the aesthetics and the function. So obviously we all want our kitchens to look as stunning as possible, which is fair enough, but you've just got to think about, it's not all about the look. Like, you've got to make sure that from a practicality point of view, it also works for you as well. If it's a case of you eat out all the time and you want it to look good, then, you do you. That's absolutely fine as well. But from an ergonomic point of view and from just a practicality, it's good just to make sure that the furniture that you've chosen is going to last longer than a couple of years, for instance, if that's a situation that you're in and you're going to be in that house for a good few years, then great. The durability of, say, like your worktop material, is that going to work for you? Just things like that. And just if you really like the look of these really intricate tiles at the back of your hob and you've got really light grouting, just got to be mindful that from a cleaning perspective, obviously you've got to make sure you're on top of that so that doesn't stain and discolour over time. So maybe look at, obviously having your worktop up to there if you can, if you've got enough in your sheets of material and you don't need to go into a complete new slab of material just for that behind the hob. Or if you want a budget, there's set sizes that you can have for a splashback, like a glass splashback behind there. And there's also lots of options where you can have, if you like the look of having the marble effect, but say if you've got a gas worktop, for instance, there are splashbacks out there where you can have like a printed pattern on the back. And I don't mean having a family photo or, a scene of your favourite place that you go on holiday, for instance. Again, if that's you, then that's fine. But equally, you could have, it can look like tiles, or it can be maybe like a marble effect, or just something that suits the overall aesthetic. But equally, from a functional point of view, it's toughened so it can go behind your hob. And also, if you have it across that whole wall, naturally, obviously, your prep area is going to be by your hob as well as your cooking. So all of your chopped tomatoes and things that's splattering all over the back of the wall, it just makes it really easy to wipe over, and it's really durable from that perspective. So again, speak to your designer and see what materials are out there that will best work for your space. If you're looking at social space, for instance, so if you've got, say, a kitchen diner, and then you've got your dining area in the one part, and then you've got your main, obviously, kitchen in the other section, do you need 4 stalls on your island, for instance, in your kitchen, or in the peninsula in your kitchen because you've got your dining room? Or is it a case of you could have a couple of stalls in there, so when you are hosting and you are getting a glass of wine, if your friends come over and, I'm pouring them a glass of wine, say if I'm cooking them dinner or something like that, it's nice to have them sat somewhere like in the actual functioning kitchen space, so that when we're then eating, we can take obviously dinner plates over to the dining room section, and then you're sat there, and then that's your proper sort of meal time. So I had a client before that does a lot of hosting. Naturally, he had a gin bar in his living room, which was amazing. But it just separates that from being in the kitchen space. If you're lucky to have like a bar in your house as well, which I've done a couple of designs for home bars. Again, you've got all of that in one zone. It's out of the way of the kitchen, so you're not trying to find a cocktail shaker while someone's in the middle of cooking, etc. So just think about that social space and think about, how many you want to host, like where that hosting space is, how many perch points you need in your main part of your kitchen, If, as I mentioned, you've got other parts of that room where you can, sit down more as a group, etc. It's just forward thinking that point of view. Something that I would absolutely, hone in on and really focus on as well is how to enhance the natural light in your space. So Johnny Gray's episode was amazing for this, because he was like, you should position your eye line when you're cooking, so that you can see the outdoors. I mean, naturally, if you're in an apartment and you've not really got much to see, or if you've got like a brick wall there, then it's about positioning yourself to see better views if you can, and maybe rejigging the space. But equally, enhancing as much natural light as possible. Like if you're having an extension and it's a single story, can you look at having the Velux windows in the top in order just to enhance that natural light a little bit more? If you've got, say, 2 double windows, for instance, could you take one of the double windows out, say if it's in a part of the room where your dining room is, and change that to double doors, again, just to bring the outside in and to open up the natural light in that space. The natural light will just make the space feel brighter. You won't have to think about in the daytime as many sort of task lights or dimmable switches or anything like that. Hopefully, I mean, in England we don't have much sun. It just elevates and just brings a brighter look to the whole space. And then talking about task lighting, so this is important for, say, if it's dark, or say if it is on a cloudy day, for instance. Make sure that you've got the relevant task lighting for your kitchen space. So for instance, naturally you need under cabinet lights for where you're prepping or where you're cooking. Obviously your extractor light helps as well when you're cooking, just so you can see everything properly. So that's a given. You don't necessarily need to go, you could go for spots for these if you want to, or you can put them on a recessed strip so they don't look as obvious. You can recess even the spots into the bottom of the cabinet now as well, so you don't see the full depth of that light underneath. So there's lots of considerations that you can look at. I've spoken about lighting before, and I've said make sure, if you can, that everything is the same hue. So if you're going for warm white for your under counters, do the same for your spotlights in your ceiling, for your pendant light, and just make sure that it's all the same if you can. Kate Parslow told me off, the interior designer, for this, because I do get a bit OCD about it, but I just notice it if I walk into a space and all of the lights aren't matching. It just annoys me. So it's up to you whether that's the case or not, but it's just a fact of, you should be able to walk into your space. It should just feel calm, comfortable, and you can't really pinpoint, like good design, you can't really pinpoint exactly what is making it good. It just all flows, it all just works well, and it's your subconscious knowing that those lights are all matching, etc. So yeah, that's from a task lighting perspective, that would be my biggest thing to think about. Also, if you've got quite a big open plan kitchen, look at, maybe, I think I've said this before about having lights above larder cabinetry or the tall cabinetry, just to elevate that side of it, or put your ambient lighting all on one setting, so that, and maybe do it on a dimmable setting as well, so that when you're sat having a glass of wine or watching the TV, just watch the last episode of Married at First Sight or whatever your bag is, you don't have to do that with your huge spotlights on in your kitchen or your task lights on. Make sure you have got this softer lighting incorporated in there as well. Even if it's a case of you've cooked and then you're clearing up and it's quite dark by that point, sometimes it's not nice before bed just looking at really bright lights. If it's a case of you don't necessarily need to have different lights in that space, look at making those task lights dimmable so that you can create that ambience even from the same space as well. But again, this is what working with a good designer can help you think about all of these elements, because it can be, if I'm giving you all this in one go and you're mid-renovation or you're just about to finalise and I've said something completely new that you haven't heard of before, don't freak out. Speak to your designer. We do this all the time, and this is what we're here to help with. And as I said, so from a storage perspective as well, it might be something that just evolves over time. Learn about these things, and then you not pressure yourself too much to make it completely perfect, but just working with somebody that you feel can help you achieve, what you want from your beautiful new kitchen. And then, hopefully we can go from there. So I hope this has helped you consider better space planning in your kitchen. Think about it as a whole collective as opposed to, lots of separate entities. Look at it from the whole day, for instance, like from breakfast through to dinner to clean up, etc. Like look at all those zones and what happens to them throughout the day, and just think about it from a psychological point of view about what you need in that space. And maybe it might be a case of it puts it less on what looks great, and it puts you more in the mindset of this is the best function for my space, and then the aesthetics will come from there 100%. So there's so many different choices and things out there now. So yeah, I'm hoping this has helped you today with everything that you need. If you've got any questions or if you need me to talk more about any certain topics, please let me know. I'm more than happy to do that. This is your podcast. This is for you to learn as much as you can to help you with your kitchen renovation project. But if you do have any questions, just message me through either Instagram, so that's at Faye Newman Design, so that's Faye, or through my website, which is fayenewmandesign.com. And then obviously I can hopefully help you from there. But have a lovely day, and we will see you next week. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you have liked what we have spoken about, why not like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, what you can do is click on the notification bell to keep yourself notified of all the new content to come.